Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of the Library of Alexandria, what was actually lost, and who actually burned it. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. The Library of Alexandria is history's greatest symbol of knowledge destroyed. Ancient sources claim it held 700,000 scrolls, the entire learning of the ancient world. Every schoolchild learns it was burned, and civilization set back 1,000 years. Almost everything in that sentence is wrong, or at least far more complicated than the myth suggests. There was no single burning. There was no single library. The catastrophic moment that destroyed the ancient world's greatest repository of knowledge is a story that was not written down by anyone who witnessed it, because it did not happen the way we remember it. What actually happened to the Library of Alexandria is more interesting, more tragic, and more instructive than the myth. Knowledge was not destroyed in one terrible fire. It was lost gradually through neglect, political instability, the departure of scholars, and the slow erosion of the institutions that preserved it. And that is a story about how knowledge disappears that applies directly to our own time. Who really burned the Library of Alexandria? The answer is probably no one and everyone. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the global puzzle of unexplained ancient construction, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. Archaeology is, by its nature, an incomplete science. We find only what survives, and what survives is determined not by importance, but by durability. Stone lasts, wood rots, metal corrodes, ceramics endure. The written word survives only if it is inscribed on stone or baked clay. Papyrus and vellum are hostages to humidity and fire. This means that every picture of the past, assembled from archaeological evidence, is a distortion, biased toward the materials that happen to last, rather than the activities that define the culture. With that cave in place, the structures that do survive from the ancient world are sometimes inexplicable by any conventional model of the societies that built them. We find stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons, fitted together with tolerances measured in millimeters, transported from quarries dozens of kilometers away, and raised to heights that challenge modern cranes. We find astronomical alignments so precise that they track the movements of specific stars over periods of thousands of years. We find architectural proportions that embed mathematical ratios, pi, phi, the Pythagorean theorem, in civilizations that supposedly had no formal mathematics. The challenge these structures pose is not engineering alone. It is conceptual. How did people without our tools conceive of projects on this scale? How did they solve the organizational problems of feeding and coordinating tens of thousands of workers over decades? How did they transmit technical knowledge across generations without standardized notation? The buildings stand as proof that they did it. The question of how remains genuinely open. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns, in science, demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding the Library of Alexandria, what was actually lost, and who actually burned it is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. The Library of Alexandria was founded around 295 BC under Ptolemy Isoda, following the advice of Demetrius of Phalerum, a student of Aristotle. It was part of the Mauseon, a research institution analogous to a modern university, which housed resident scholars on state stipends. At its peak, the collection held an estimated 400,000 to 700,000 papyrus scrolls, though ancient estimates vary and the counting methods are unknown. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the library housed the working copies of Aristotle's library, purchased by the Ptolemies, the mathematical works of Euclid, who worked in Alexandria, and the manuscripts of Eratosthenes, the librarian who calculated the Earth's circumference to within 1% accuracy around 240 BC, using shadow angles at noon. Eratosthenes served as chief librarian and used the library's resources to produce the first systematic geography of the known world. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine. Alexandria had multiple buildings associated with learning. The main Bruchian Royal Library sat within the palace complex. A second, smaller library was housed at the Temple of Serapis, the Serapeum, in the city's southern quarter. When ancient sources discuss the library's destruction, they do not always specify which building they mean, creating centuries of confusion about which fire destroyed which collection at which time. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation. But the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, Hypatia of Alexandria, mathematician, philosopher, and head of the Neoplatonist school, taught and worked in Alexandria until her murder by a Christian mob in 415 AD. Her death is often associated with the library's decline, though she was not herself the librarian. She was the last great scholar of the classical Alexandrian tradition, and her murder marks a symbolic end to the institution's intellectual culture, if not the building's physical existence. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria in 48 BC during a civil war between Ptolemy Roman 13 and Cleopatra. During the fighting around the harbor, a fire broke out and spread to the docks. Ancient sources, including Plutarch, describe books being burned in this fire. This is the most commonly cited burning of the library, but contemporary accounts specify that what burned was a storage warehouse near the docks containing books awaiting export, not the main Bruchian library. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding. The Arab Caliph Omar is often credited in popular culture with ordering the library burned in 642 AD, on the grounds that books agreeing with the Quran were redundant and books disagreeing with it were heretical. This story appears in a 12th century source, 500 years after the alleged event, and is now rejected by most historians as a medieval legend. By 642 AD, if the library still existed in any form, it had already been in decline for centuries. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations, and in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Library of Alexandria, what was actually lost, and who actually burned it. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that Julius Caesar accidentally caused the destruction of the library during the Alexandria siege of 48 BC. This is the oldest and most cited culprit narrative, supported by Plutarch, Livy, and others. The main objection is that Strabo visited Alexandria after Caesar's fire and described the library as functioning, and that Plutarch specifies the fire-consumed books stored at the docks, not the main collection in the Bruccian palace. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that the library was destroyed when Theophilus, Bishop of Alexandria, ordered the Serapeum demolished in 391 AD at the command of Emperor Theodosius. The Serapeum housed the secondary library collection and was razed as a pagan temple. This event is well documented and certainly destroyed a significant book collection, but the main Bruccian library had likely already declined. Scholars continued working in Alexandria after 391 AD. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the library declined gradually over centuries through a combination of reduced royal funding under Roman rule, the emigration of scholars to Rome and Constantinople, physical damage from successive civil conflicts, and the general collapse. Sea of papyrus scroll culture as codex books replaced scrolls. This gradual decline model, now dominant in academic history, denies any single catastrophic burning, but is less narratively satisfying than a villain with a torch. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree, that is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Library of Alexandria, what was actually lost, and who actually burned it, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence. material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes Plutarch's account of Caesar's fire explicitly describes books stored near the harbor being burned, not the main Bruccean library. Strabo's geography, written after Caesar's visit, describes the Mausian and its library as a functioning institution. Orosius, writing in 415 AD, describes seeing empty shelves in Alexandria, not burned ruins, suggesting dispersal or neglect rather than destruction. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented no contemporary eyewitness account of a single catastrophic burning of the main library exists in the historical record. The sources that describe dramatic destruction are all written decades to centuries after the alleged events, in a period when Alexandria's greatness was already a memory. This absence is significant. The burning of a 700,000 scroll library would have been the most commented upon event of its century. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed the scholarly work of Mostafa El-Abadi, particularly his 1992 study Life and Fate of the Ancient Library of Alexandria, represents the most comprehensive modern analysis of the primary sources. El-Abadi's conclusion that the library declined through a long series of partial disasters and funding failures rather than one fire is now the consensus position in classical scholarship, though the dramatic single-burning narrative persists in popular culture. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Library of Alexandria, what was actually lost and who actually burned it. Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. The new Bibliotheca Alexandrina opened in 2002 on the shore of Alexandria near the site of the ancient library, represents a symbolic act of cultural recovery. Designed by a Norwegian architectural firm and holding 8 million books, it acknowledges both the myth and the reality of its predecessor. Academic consensus now firmly supports the gradual decline model over any single catastrophe narrative. The myth of the one burning persists because it is morally useful. It gives knowledge a murderer, a moment of loss, and an implicit warning. The truth that institutions decay through neglect, budget cuts, and the indifference of successors is harder to dramatize but more accurate, and more relevant to how knowledge disappears today. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Library of Alexandria, what was actually lost and who actually burned it, from the historical record, through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Library of Alexandria ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please subscribe to the channel. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment below telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.